Hello and welcome to another episode of Brand Retro. Today we're going to be meeting with the guys from Janus Motorcycles. Janus Motorcycles is a super cool motorcycle company, American manufacturer of small displacement motorcycles in Goshen, Indiana. The company was founded in 2011 by one of our guests, Richard, and also they've been delivering motorcycles since 2013. So Richard, Grant, Jordan, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Mike, how are you doing?
Hello, we're doing
We're
doing good. So I've been looking forward to this one. I am semi-familiar with your story and I've actually heard it directly from you guys, but I want to share it with the listeners because I think from an entrepreneurial standpoint, from just a creative standpoint, I think everything that kind of goes into what Janus is all about has a really cool story. It's got a retro nostalgic vibe, which I love. And I think it's something worth sharing because I think there's entrepreneurs out there and there's people that listen to this podcast that, have never taken that leap and they've never created something, so unique, such as what Janus has done. So start off by telling me a little bit about the concept. Tell me the history and how you guys got started.
take
Sure.
Richard.
All right, I'll take it. So the origins of Janus go back to when I came out to move to Indiana, which I'll say we were based in Goshen, Indiana. I moved out here and I had an old vintage moped. So the pedal type Italian kind of 1970s bikes and loved it. Met a guy out here who ran a restoration shop and just kind of got more and more involved in restoring those, building custom versions of little bikes, and then building our own prototype, or our own one-off kind of custom cafe racer style, which is like a race bike based around that. And
That was called the Paragon.
called the Paragon.
Yep.
And that, through the process of building that kind of in spare time, just as kind of a passion project, got us interested in the idea of a production vehicle company. Sounds like a big jump, but if you understood the way that Devin and my brain worked at that point, we were doing some small scale production and it wasn't that far of a jump to think that we could make a limited run of these things. And
So not to interrupt you, but like I envision a couple guys working in a garage, dim lighting, maybe drinking beer, ordering pizza for a while, right? We're just
absolutely.
having fun.
Bad beer and Caesar's Pizza, right?
Fueled by Little Caesars is exactly what I was going to say.
And then all of a sudden there's this what if discussion, right? Like,
Yep.
what if we actually did this, right?
Absolutely. We were just sitting there one evening and came up with the idea of, well, let's make more than one of these. And we started by making a bike that we wanted to make kind of like out of what we'd always wanted to do, and not so much wise or well researched business plan version, but definitely like kind of like an ideal, a personal ideal, kind of a melding of what we wanted. And so the first bike we made was a 50cc two-stroke. So absolutely building on our background of these little vintage Italian bikes.
Yeah, the reason you didn't need a focus group is because you were that for 5 years.
Yep.
You were the focus group, and your moped gang was the focus group.
Yep.
You didn't need that because you already inhabited it for so long.
Yeah, I actually absolutely like that's a good point. The moped gang, he says moped gang, but really we called ourselves a gang, and there was a movement, especially at that time, of lots of these people interested in vintage mopeds, and you'd go to rallies or just events, and through that you could kind of see what the trends were and what people were interested in. And you're absolutely right in the sense that we did do a lot of research through just friendships and going to events around the country and learning about the bikes. But those first couple of years of Janus were mostly just one bike would fund the next bike, and it wasn't really a profitable business as it is today. But then in 2014 or so, we met Jordan here, who started doing some video work and photography for us. And then shortly after, we met his friend Grant, and who started helping us with marketing. And really at that point, we thought, okay, we need to create a product that's a little more accessible to the modern market, that meets modern emission standards, for example, et cetera, et cetera. And Janus matured into what you could really recognize as a company and less as two guys in a garage with a box of pizza.
Instead, it was 4 kinds of
Exactly.
and a handle of whiskey.
Yeah. So where in the process did it formalize for you guys? Because I know kind of being a car guy and being around that kind of stuff, there's such a passion for it that hanging out with your buddies and doing this stuff and innovating and figuring out how to make stuff work and actually getting the motor to run, like there's a part of that that's just fun, right? At what point in that process were you like, I think I want to take this and mesh it with a business concept? Because a lot of people, they never want to make that move because they don't want to pollute the passion, right? They don't want to make it a business. So at what point did you kind of decide, hey, I want to take it that way and here's what I want to do with it?
I think in some ways the product led you guys into, I mean, like the first products that you put out were so polished that it looked, people ask us a lot, well, what are these replicas of? And it looks like, in some ways, it looked like a replica of some hidden old motorcycle brand, unknown brand,
Yeah.
a production model. It was like a recreation of a production model.
That exactly gets to what I would say is that the fascination that I've had before doing it was in making a production thing that as though it was a brand.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I've always been fascinated with that. So it was never really like, and I think that's what we all kind of appreciate about it is that it is a brand and we're thinking of it as a company and that these are replicable. It's, like, I don't think I've ever really been fascinated with custom, 100% custom stuff.
Right. Well, from an observation point, that's what I think is really cool about what you guys are doing in Janus Motorcycles as a whole is the impression that's given because of the nostalgia. It's got like this really rich history and you're like thinking, oh my God, like I can't imagine what that story is like. And then you tell it and is it 10 years, 12 years? How long you guys been in business?
10 years. Yep.
Yeah. So it's like, wait, it's only 10 years, but the way you've branded it and the way you've presented it, you'd think that this company's been around for 100 years, which is super cool. It's successfully, you pulled it off. And I think that's pretty cool about the whole brand.
Yep. There's a story about this. What's the name of the brand that they found that bike behind the brand? A Traub. There's a motorcycle. Have you heard of this, Mike?
I have not.
There's this demolition crew went into a brownstone in Chicago
In like the 70s?
in the 70s and realized that there was a hidden room in this house and they busted it open and there was one motorcycle in there called the Traub. And it was the same sort of, in some ways, it's the same sort of, it was this one motorcycle that it seemed as if it was a lost production model.
The engine has the name cast into it.
Yeah.
But there's no record of any other thing like that ever existing.
Absolutely. There's never been that company. There's never, the die was never found that actually made that stamp.
Yeah.
But the museum is the bike is at Wheels Through Time Museum.
Yep. Yeah.
It's well documented.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Interesting mystery. So, in some ways that's the kind of discovery that I think our raving customers or our most passionate customers, they kind of somehow stumble upon us or, they are targeted by a Facebook ad, but there's a sense of discovery that we want to give people when they discover, or they find our YouTube channel, or they find, they see, we had one spate of customers in a row and they say, I saw your bike in a warehouse in Las Vegas and it must've been some terminal that somebody, it was some shipping delay from our shipper. And there was a bike that must've been sitting right by the front door. And these people just became romanced by it. They walked through to pick up their Harley or, buy a, used Honda or something. And they saw that and then they just like couldn't get it out of their brain. It's like a little seed that they couldn't set down and forget about. It's fun to kind of think about that sense of mystery in it and a sense of discovery.
Yeah. There was a part of it so I've shared this with you guys before, but the history for the listener is that I got targeted by an ad at some sort because I follow brands and I like retro things. And I'm sure that's what got me. But when I started and kind of became aware of Janus, I didn't know if it was a motorcycle company or a clothing company, or if you just sold leather saddlebags or kind of what you did. I was captured just by the visual and I'm like, hey, that's really cool. And then the more I looked at it, the more I was like, so they're restoring these bikes or how's this work? And I just kept going further and further. And I started to realize like, wait, these are new. How is this even possible? They just had such a retro vibe. And I think however it appeals to the audience, whether it's just the retro look or they're just kind of gearheads, or if they, whatever it is, the overall collection on how it's presented and what brings people in, I think is pretty fascinating. And the idea that it's kind of sticking so hard to the retro nostalgia vibe is not something you necessarily see anybody else doing. You know, I follow the normal Harley Davidsons and the Indian motorcycles and all those guys, and they'll every once in a while throw a retro vibe on a bike, or they'll do some kind of a heritage classic kind of a thing where they'll commemorate, but they don't necessarily lean into it as hard. And that's what I think super cool about what you guys are doing, is because I think there's a whole niche there. I think there's a whole audience there, and there's a whole group of people that maybe, you know, maybe they like to tinker as well. Maybe they're building their own cafe racer, whatever it is, but to be able to actually go buy one that's new and it's got a production number and it kind of came off the showroom floor, that's a pretty cool option for people that are into bikes.
Yeah, I think a lot of modern manufacturers, and I would do the same thing if I was a part of a major manufacturing operation. The retro treatment is removing bodywork and it's a new decal package. So for us, it's built into the bones of the bike. So it's rather than a decal package and the bikes are awesome. Like the new Yamaha XS, whatever that is, that, it looks amazing, but it's a sport bike with bodywork removed and a decal package on it. Whereas our bikes are a Norton featherbed frame with a hardtail on it, and it's welded by Amish folks. And, so it's a different level of, we're not trying to out retro anybody. It's just, in some ways, it's just what our vision of motorcycling is. And that it's just varied so differently from where the modern market has. And that's what we say here, that we want to become more weird. How do we get more weird? How do we get more into, how do we inhabit what our, spirit is, so that other people are like, oh, we're not even going to go there.
And I, no insults to any other bike companies out there, but I think you guys are out retroing other companies, whether you want to or not, you are.
Yeah.
And I think you're out organically, your organic vibe. And what I mean by that, we'll quantify that in a second, but with what you're doing with almost like a hand built kind of a model and the Amish element, and like, there's things that you are doing that, it might seem different or crazy to some people as to why, well, wouldn't that slow things down, or wouldn't it to be this or that, the other thing, because everybody thinks about production as how many can you churn out. And I think about it as a quality thing. I'm thinking that's actually pretty cool and gives us a lot of uniqueness to every bike that comes out of Janus. Can you talk a little bit about kind of how that works? What's the production process? And, like you mentioned, the Amish piece, how does that all work together to get you to the finish line and roll those bikes out of the doors?
Yeah. Gonna stab that one?
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's not something that you necessarily would set up as like a business model if you're thinking about, like planning it all out ahead of time. But we had a bunch of, through the vintage bikes and doing work on those, we just kind of built organically a network of folks around mostly Elkhart County, kind of in the surrounding area as well, who could do a lot of the stuff we needed done. You just needed it. So you find the easiest, you work with one person and you ask them, who do you know that does this, or powder coating or whatever. And so most of the people we worked with are Amish, because they have a lot of great small job shops that are willing to take on one, single piece projects.
Yeah.
And we just built up this network that was interested in working with us, and that fit what we needed, which is making it like a blacksmith shop, or just one-off thing. So that's how we kind of built or met these people. And then because we knew who they were, and because we worked with them, we over the whole history of the company, worked on streamlining that process and growing. And we've grown. I mean, the relationships we have with
Leroy,
like our Leroy and his brothers that make most of our parts is, I mean, it predates the company, and it's we care about each other deeply. And so it goes beyond just a business transaction. really meaningful thing. But anyway, in terms of actually how it flows, it's changed a lot over the years, but it's kind of clarified at this point into a system where we have a guy who drives a black van around the county every day. He does a route. We call it the milk route, and Cameron is the milkman. And he goes around and drops off parts and picks them up. So literally full milk bottles and takes away the empties around the county. And so these folks will build the part to our order, and then we'll pick it up from the guy who's welding it, take it to the guy who's sandblasting, take it to the powder coater, drop off the machine parts for the welding. And it's just this cycle that keeps going, that resulting in finished parts showing up at our door and ready to build. And I think Grant can speak a little bit about a lot of the work we've done in the last couple of years has been the what would you say? The flow.
Yeah. We work with, I mean, in some ways it's such a, you said organic, and, you know, I'm going back to that again. We've kind of, the image in my brain is kind of a river, and, you know, the river of how we make these bikes has kind of found its course naturally. And we were lucky enough, fortunate enough to be in a place where there's fertile ground for manufacturing things. And you walk into somebody's shop and they say, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, and I'd love to do that for you. Or, you know, our powder coater used to, he's an Amish guy, and he used to restore antique carriages, like stuff that's like museums.
For the king of,
Yeah.
you know,
For the king of, you know,
some
Swabia
European
or
small
something.
country.
Yeah. You know, so you like get into this really fertile place in the, you know, Elkhart County and, you know, the surrounding counties in northern Indiana. I'm sure there's places like this outside of Detroit, you know, with other sort of built-in geniuses in their land. But we just kind of found our way. The river ran its course, and now we have one that's, the river is flowing motorcycles. And we've worked really hard in the last 2 years, kind of making that into a process and seeing where we can streamline some of that process and improve communication. So there's less manual kind of, we call it cognitive versus reflexive, which is a lean manufacturing kind of dichotomy. We've worked with one of our mentors who's a manufacturing guru in Elkhart County, has kind of helped us through that process of understanding how we make the river flow better. Not necessarily in a mass manufacturing sense, but in the specific and in the scale that we're at, it flows much more without having somebody tell that thing to go to the next thing. The milk van just shows up. And so it's been a really fun process, really kind of inhabiting this new kind of manufacturing that is more about, we're craft manufacturing, or I don't know what the kind of the distinction would be. It's definitely not mass manufactured. We don't order batches of 1,000 of anything unless it's M8 bolts or something, you know. But
Yeah.
that's been, we have learned along with the system. You know, there was not necessarily something pulling that out of anywhere. It was us kind of finding our way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And having the advantage of having, you know, been to Janus and kind of touring the facility and stuff, and I'm hopefully not giving away any special secrets here, but the one thing that I thought that was really cool that stood out, and I think is a differentiator for you guys, and it actually, to me, leans into the values of the bikes, is that there's a very, you know, we said the word organic, but I think there's a very relationship kind of based approach to it, because yes, there are machines involved in this process, but you're literally dealing with people in these departments, and Joe's talking to Bob, and Bob's talking, like, all these people are working together,
Yep.
like from a relationship standpoint, to get this thing to the finish line. So to say that these bikes are hand built by, you know, a team of people, don't think like Detroit manufacturing, like Ford Motor Company. It's not like that. It's a much more polished version of those guys in the garage eating pizza. Like, it's awesome. It's really a neat kind of peek behind the curtain as to how these things come together, and kind of the personal touch that goes into each one of these bikes.
And both relying on and amplifying the genius and the skill of the people at every step of the way, rather than trying to manufacture skill out of the equation, or craftsmanship out of the equation.
Yeah, I was going to say on that, just to follow up on Grant, that I feel like the way we're working now is the way we manufacture is kind of getting out of the way of the human element, like, or making the system fit the human element. so that it flows really well.
Yeah, rather than trying to remove the human element is what makes and in some ways that's what's really fun about making a motorcycle, is that motorcycles themselves at their best when they're ridden amplify the human element too. And so it's about meeting people, and it's about, you as a human controlling your machine, and, it's a combination of machine and human rather than, one or the other. And I think that's, it's an interesting kind of symbiotic relationship between how the bikes are made and how they're meant to be ridden and how they're meant to be interacted with in the real world. These are bikes made with a conversation, and they're made to create conversation when you ride them out into the world. And it's been something that's been fun to discover. Honestly, we're discovering the bike behind the wall too, as we kind of make our way through building the company. It's, we're kind of discovering more and more things and understanding it more. We all have a direction we would like to, we have goals for all of it, but it's definitely an act of discovery rather than an act of brute force leadership or a concept that we had 10 years ago that we're still putting into fruition. It's seeds that are growing rather. Yeah.
Yeah. It's all, a lot of times it's like, wow, that worked out really well. Or, that's interesting how that played out.
Well, happy accidents you got to take them, right?
Yep.
So,
yep. And some unhappy ones too, but
yeah, no, I hear you. If you'd like to learn more about CyberDogs, share your thoughts, or even ask a specific question about this episode and/or the brand Retro Mindset, contact me directly at mike@cyberdogsmarketing.com.